Welcome to Secure the Soil, your go to podcast for California's future food system. This show is about engaging conversations around innovation, sustainability, community health, and it's about how you can discover how you can contribute to a greener, healthier world, man. And more specifically, we tapping into the California Agricultural Land Task Force recommendation, and we're gonna be breaking that down. So helping you all to understand how you can get in place for this agriculture reset that is already underway, right? So once again, welcome back. Today episode is really, really personal for me. The first two episodes, we talked about the great agriculture reset. I talked about the three keys that you can get in position with. And I kept saying the infrastructure that's already built, right? The work that's already being done, the pathways that are already laid for you. So in this episode, I want to show you what it actually looks like, right? And so there's a lot of rooms I've been in, and there's things that are happening, and I just kind of want to tap into, how it all started, a little bit more of my journey, you know, if that's okay with you, because I do think that it's important to tell, how I got into these rooms in the first place and why I think that matters for you all. And I think it matters because to help understand, just kind of my credentials and kind of, what to a degree gives me the right to have these conversations, right? You know what I'm saying? And really all starts within a community garden within my city, right? And just refusing to accept that nothing can be done. Like I just couldn't, I wasn't going to be okay with that, right? So I want to take you back to my initial involvement with policy work and how it began, right? And it's not a version that looks polished. It's not like, in retrospect, it really just was me, feet on the ground, boots to the ground. And when I was doing agricultural work, urban agriculture work in Compton, I was running the Compton Community Garden, right? Me and many people, I just helped create a board. And then I also was a manager at CrossFop LA, running a small farm. And while I'm doing this, I'm trying to figure out how to feed people in a food desert all around LA. And I just kept running to the same wall. So while I'm having this role of being a director of a community garden and being a manager, urban farm, I'm also a part of Los Angeles County Equity Roundtable. I'm also still wrapping up the BIPOC Advisory Committee to the CDFA. I'm also a communications coordinator of California Farmer Justice Collaborative, and I'm also part of the National Young Farmers Coalition Land Fellowship. And this is all happening simultaneously. And a little more context, this is right after my father died, right? And I'm definitely dealing with all kind of grief and trauma. While also my grandfather I know he's going to die really soon. He actually eventually died around that time, in spring. Yeah, and then my grandmother died in June. So while everything around me, we're building things and we sitting on land that we can't control in different aspects, and I'm accepting that a lot of stuff that I'm doing is just is temporary, right? And I didn't always have the language at first. I'm a part of the Land Task Force policy. Um, I mean, right. So I just knew that something was fundamentally broken and about different situations that I was in, and from a city to a county to a state to a federal level, right? And it's like I'm observing that we can grow food, I'm observing that we can build the community, but when when permits ain't right and money not right, then disputes start to happen, and just it always came back to just not having land security, right? And when land security it's not secure, right? Things can just go away, vanishing. So, you know, like I said, around this time, I'm starting to really pay attention to policy side because I'm not trying to be like some policy person, but I'm just trying to understand how this all works, right? I'm trying to understand how legislation works, how land ownership works, how land access works, right? What is the legal aspects, and how do we keep building things on sand, right? And I remember early 2022, I got connected with just people from all over California, and these were people who were thinking about the same things that I'm thinking about. Like I said, we thinking about food systems. These are advocates, these are farmers, these are tribal representatives, these are urban agriculture practitioners, these are researchers, policy strategists, right? It's just so many different people who we all run into the same wall. It's just with different directions. And this group became the Land Equity Collective, right? As I was saying. And I want to be clear about who I was in this room. Like, I do think that it matters. So I was in this room. I wasn't there as a policy expert, right? I wasn't there as someone. I was just doing so much work on the ground, right? This is when I'm writing books, and I'm, like I said, doing so many different things and connecting with the elders from the BIPOC Advisory Committee and people from all over the state, and Allensworth and Sacramento. And I'm really just like, being like a new guy in this space, kind of. I'm just representing Compton. I'm representing the hood. I'm representing urban agriculture, right? And I also represent LA County at this time as well. It's like I said, on this advisory committee. So I'm just someone who kind of understood firsthand, once again, what does it feel like to keep building without land security, even on the urban level, and then watching things just get taken away and things just crumble. And so that was just me, having a seat at this table, and this turned out to be exactly, from my vantage point, I contributed to this, And so this Land Equity Collective was formed around a very specific mission. Honestly, it was just to advocate for policy solutions that would address what we call a land equity crisis in California. And this crisis, it looks like, in numbers. Let's really break this down for a while. Let's really, sit with this information, right? Which is, man, like, it's just heavy to even say this kind of stuff. 98% of agricultural land in California is owned by people who are classified as white. I know I said it before, but it's like, this is what we're coming around together. In hindsight, of like, this is what we're really dealing with. Like, and the average farmer is 60 years old, and most don't have a succession plan. So that leaves BIPOC farmers, tribal communities, beginning farmers, and farm workers. We've just been systemically locked out collectively, right? We all are locked out of land ownership for generations. And with the land value increasing, right, now you have institutional investors, hedge funds moving in, climate pressures reshaping agricultural landscape, right? I mean, once again, during this time, it was a major drought. It was a major drought in 2022, right? 2023 is when we had the major flooding, but during this time, it's so much drought. So there's this window for equitable intervention is very narrow. This is, as we see so much of this equity stuff, is these initiatives are being shut down and canceled. And this, we knew at this time, like, we have to do something about this right now while there is still this conversation of creating equity, right? And it's a very narrow window. And it's just the reality of just, this is a really big problem. And then this question we kept collectively coming back to is, in these early meetings, I remember it was just like, what can we actually do at a policy level? And I remember one of the first major steps was just collectively going to, like, observe, where can we go, who is an institution or office or anything that we can approach. And we approached the Strategic Growth Council, right? And let me give a little intel about that. For those who don't know, the SGC, Strategic Growth Council, right, is a state body that's made up of 7 cabinet level agency heads and 3 public members that's appointed by the governor, the Senate, and the Assembly. So their mission is just to essentially build healthy, thriving, resilient communities across California. Like, that's their mission, right? So they operate at, like, the intersection of climate, investment, and equity. which means that they have a specific task of making sure that the climate dollars do reach the people and the places that need it the most. So I remember in October 2022, a group of us, once again, community members, right, farmers, urban agriculture people, tribal representatives, right, advocates, right. We had this initial meeting with the SGC, and I remember being on that, I remember being on that Zoom call um in October and just, kind of just making our case. And I remember just being, you know, I remember what it felt like, because I'm not no government insider, I'm not a lobbyist, or we're just people from different communities that have been historically excluded from exactly these kinds of conversations. And once again, we just showing up. And I think this is, we kind of observe that this is a problem and this is what our communities need. And that this is what we're asking, we asked them, the Strategic Growth Council, help us create it. Right. And we put some real numbers in front of them. We told them what we seen on the ground, and we made this ask, like California needs some kind of formal state funded body to develop policy recommendations. And we need to figure out how to address agricultural land crisis, right? Because it's a crisis, right? And what came from that was some advocacy, right? I'll just continue to have public meetings, continue to make public comments, continue to once again build relationships. We help to create AB 179, Assembly Bill 179, right? And it was a part of California's Budget Act of 2022. And so essentially, AB 179 created the California Agricultural Land Task Force formally, right? Let's be clear, formally, with state funding, with a clear mandate to develop real policy recommendations and to essentially deliver them to the governor and the legislation. So I want you to really sit with that for a second, right? Because a group of people from the community, right? Farmers, farm members, farm workers, urban agricultural people, tribal advocates, tribal representatives, food justice organizers, right? We just made our case for something, and the state of California created it. So I do believe that this is what advocacy can produce, and this was like to show up consistently and when it actually works, right? So you can understand the chain, right? And this chain is where you can just continue to show up too, honestly, you know. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about the Strategic Growth Council, as this infrastructure around it, right? Let me try to kind of give a little picture of it, because they, from my vantage point, they are going to come up a little bit more as I'm discussing, right? Because beyond hosting the task force, the SGC runs multiple grant programs that are just directly relevant to the work that we're about, right? Sustainable Agriculture Lands Conservation Program, which is called SALC. It's not a perfect. There's a lot of different nuances and perspectives of it, but it's something that exists, right? And it's intended to protect California agricultural land from conversion to development, right? And then you got the Transformative Climate Communities Program, which helps to fund large scale equity projects in the state's most disadvantaged communities. And you got food and agricultural systems work is explicitly equitable, eligible, and be clear. You also have the Tribal Capacity Building Program, which funds tribal governments, native communities to build capacity for accessing and managing land and resources, right? And these are real programs, right? Like I said, I'm not here to say they are just this perfect thing. I'm not just here to say none of the thing in our state is perfect and incredible and immaculate, but I'm also just here to say, hey, once again, like I talked about with episode 2, like there are things that are existing, right? And there are things that have real money that are really funded, and it goes to California's cap and trade system, right? And it's all administered by the same organization that housed the task force. So I mean, you can always go to their website, sgc.ca.gov, and just do your own due diligence, do your own research. You know what I'm saying? Look it up for yourself. And maybe one day I'll take a look through there. But I do need you all to bookmark that, and just take a look, because a lot of stuff that we're talking about, it is going to be on that website. Like I want to really, just come from behind the veil and show what's really going on, So So let's talk about how the task force was built. It was a 13-member independent body, and I want to walk you through the composition of it, how it was built intentionally, right? It included native tribal liaisons, people with direct connection in California nations, right? Right, individuals with expertise affecting socially disadvantaged farmers, ranchers, someone with some in agricultural acquisition and finance, a farm worker representative, a beginning farmer, the CDFA Farm Equity Advisor, a member of the CDFA BIPAC Farmer Advisory Committee, and the chair of the task force was Nelson Hawkins. Much respect to him. I'll be interviewing him very soon. Founder of We Grow Farms and co-executive director of Ujama Farmer Collective. Right. So this is the same Ujama Collective whose 20-acre farm and winners I told you about episode 1. Right. And it's the same project that I did my part to just help advocate funding for. So this isn't a stranger to me. This is people that we've been working together, to some degree, for years. These are like my community. These are like, extended family members, Honestly, man, these people I've been in rooms with, organized alongside of, advocated with for years. And this is a part of why this show exists, because I do have proximity to people like that I want to use to bring to more people. Right. So once again, I just want to be honest about my role in this. And what my role was. Like I said, I'm not on the task force itself. I'm gonna be very clear. I was just a part of the Land Equity Collective, right? The community advocacy body that pushed for the task force creation and continues to organizing around it, even as it existed, right? And in that capacity, I said in public meetings, I was a part of conversations about what the task force should prioritize. I was involved in different discussions around AB 524, which is a legislation that we helped author to begin implementing some of what the task force was developing. Like we were trying to, work congruently, work with them. And some of, us, we spent a lot of months working through just, this bill's language, as far as that bill, and about farmer cooperative definitions, just things like conservation easement questions, grants versus loans, tribal exemptions. It's very detailed, very complicated, and deeply work that I feel is very important. And throughout all of that, I was still, just this urban ag guy, this guy with some experience, but I'm still in the room. From my vantage point, I'm really asking, what does this mean for my city? What does it mean for the hood? What does it mean for someone trying to start a community garden? What does it mean for somebody who's just not in this room? But this is who the work is for. Honestly, like my contribution was to just speak up for us who don't come from this. And I truly believe that it did matter and it still matters, right? And this task force, from what we gather, it was organized around 4 goals from my vantage point, and I'm gonna talk about them, personally. Goal 1, of course, was tribal stewardship and land return. Like, definitely you gotta respect that. Being in spaces with tribal members. I was a part of the BIPOC advisory committee and a part of different, just conversations with Cheyenne Stone from Big Paiute tribe, who was also part of our collective at one time, and that helped me to really change how I view land. Honestly, entirely. Like, land isn't just property. It can be, identity. It can be culture. It can be a spiritual practice. It can be food sovereignty. And, honestly, policy framework that doesn't center tribal stewardship isn't actually addressing land equity at all. And I'm being very, very clear about that. It's just rearranging who among, non-native people gets access. And it is a nuanced conversation. It is a very nuanced conversation. But that was one of the goals, and goal 2 was how do we protect and thriving agricultural lands that's already going crazy, not going crazy, but like that's an expression we say in the hood. Like, it's already booming. It's already doing numbers. It's already producing, right? Because California is losing on average about 1 square mile of agricultural land every 5 days. And that's according to the Department of Conservation. So my vantage point, this goal address how we protect what already remains and make sure that it actually produces food for communities. And it's not just for financial returns or investors, right? Goal 3 was equitable land transition and land acquisition. Let's be honest. This is one I spent, from my vantage point, a lot of time, probably the most time, thinking about based upon my own personal experience and based upon my own community, right? Respectfully. Like, when that aging farmer retires, when that family decides to sell the land, how do we make sure that the land can go to BIPOC, beginning farmer, or farm worker cooperative, or a tribal community as well, for sure. Like, respect him. Instead of being just absorbed by some hedge fund, somebody will, no, I'm not anti people with money. I'm not anti none of that, anti hedge fund, but how do we, balance this out, mitigate this out? Because as we see, it's extremely inequitable. It's astronomically inequitable, right? So yeah, that was a goal, right? That we were just trying to solve, right? And goal 4 was secure land tenure, right? Secure the soil. Once again, you know what I'm saying? Secure land tenure, for real, and this is one for me, as we see, right, it's very personal, right? What I seen happen, in Compton, what I seen happen so many times, so many places, right? It's just, I've watched this happen for so many projects. I've heard about the stories. People build these projects and they just can't sustain them, right? And it's just the land tenure. It's just land tenure is important, right? And to me, this goal is about making sure that, once again, communities can gain access to land and they can keep the land that they gain access to. That what are the legal tools? What are the protective structures? What are the policy frameworks that can create this permanence? So that was the 4 goals, right? And there was subcommittees, right? And that's really like where the details live, That was going, kind of extrapolating the 4 goals, right? And though they went to a more deeper, I would say, specific route, right? And I do want to name those because we are going to come back to every one of them on the show, right? So you have one subcommittee, which is the restorative land subcommittee, right? Focus on how land taken from communities through discriminatory policy can be restored, right? Then you had the grants and resources subcommittee, right? Literally just focus on identifying and expanding the funding mechanisms available for land access and equity work. So like I said, there was a lot of ecosystem, a lot of stuff going on around this that we're going to dive into. I'll kind of just, continue with the outline, right? So yeah, like I said, this is kind of just where the money conservation lives, right? And then the AB 524 subcommittee focused on legislation I was close to through the Land Equity Collective, right? So, months of work on language of that bill that happened in our subcommittee, right? And then there was also a community outreach subcommittee, right? Because the task force understood that their work is meaningless if the communities most affected don't know exist, right? And that's so real, man. And I remember the last meeting that we had with the task force. We all was really echoing that. I was like, this has to be something that's continuing to live and get to the people. And that's, once again, that's how I feel. That's to me what Secure the Soil is. This is outreach. This is, informal, unofficial, but once again, that's a part of why Alceria's Bridge was created, was because that's something that we can't control. I can't control the state. I can't control the government. I can't control the money. I can't control anything but myself. And what I can control is outreach. I can't control getting the information out. So, much respect to that. And then there was Sustaining the Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee, which addresses how land management can honor ecological health and the cultural practices tied to land for indigenous and traditional farming communities, right? So every one of these subcommittees held a public meeting, and every meeting was recorded, and all of it's available right now on the SGC's YouTube channel. If y'all want to type in, and once again, it's all free information. Like, I want you all to go watch it yourself, like, not because it's easy viewing, but because you're going to see this process like in action, right? And I do think it's important for understanding how change can actually get made. Like the fact that it's all on YouTube right now, I'm gonna do my part to to kind of summarize, to give the insight how I can. But let's be very clear: all of this is every single meeting, every subcommittee meeting, it's all right now. This is all public. You know what I'm saying? This is for the state. None of this is. I'm not. I'm not saying nothing that isn't available. You know what I'm saying? So there's something I do want to highlight because it does reflect something real about the integrity of this process. Like the task force, they didn't just meet in Sacramento. They traveled to different communities most affected by land equity issues. They met in Humboldt County, right? They met in Ventura. They met in San Diego. They met in Fresno. They met in Allisworth. They met in Arcata. They visited farms. They visited urban gardens. They visited tribal farms, right? Over 400 people were directly engaged through their outreach process. That's real talk. They did surveys in English, Spanish, Chinese. They held listening sessions with Black farmers in Kern County, with Mixteco indigenous community members in Ventura, with tribal nation across the state. This report was not just written by bureaucrats in the building. It was built on lived experiences of communities that it was meant to serve. And that does matter, because it does mean that when we are reading these recommendations, that we are reading something that carries, like I said, these are real people, real voices, real things that, it's living, So yeah, this task force, they were just mandated to deliver their full report to the governor and the legislator by January of 2026. So yeah, that report was submitted, right? Now we're going to spend the next several episodes of this show going through those recommendations one by one, right? Breaking them down, bringing in the experts who shaped them, talking about what they mean for people in our communities, right? But I do want you to feel the weight of where we are right now, that these recommendations are sitting in front of the governor and the legislator right now. And like what happens next, whether they all get funded, whether they get implemented, whether they produce real change, or they just sit as a document. It honestly depends in large part of whether communities like ours show up to demand action. Honestly, and from my vantage point, this is why this show exists, right? So once again, that's why I wanted to create some kind of framework, some kind of roadmap, right? And I definitely think that people should go there, like I said, watch the meetings, go on the Agriculture Land Equity Task Force, right? And every meeting that has ever happened is listed right on there, right? It's this agenda. Um, there's links to all of its materials. There's a link to the recordings, right? You can email them directly. You can call them. The numbers on the website. You can follow them on YouTube. All the meetings of the task force, right? They're even on X, right? You can sign up for the email list. You'll be notified new meetings and new resources, new opportunities, right? Once again, this is all public. It's all free, and it's all built in part through advocacy from people of communities like myself, like yours. And I do think it's something that we should use, honestly. Like, and I want to be direct about why this episode is so personal, because I spent years in these rooms before I even really understood what was really being built. But I also had a vision to say, let me see this through. I just showed up to meetings. I sat in subcommittee meetings. I helped work through legislation language. I advocated alongside people who had been doing this for decades longer than me. And even with all that proximity, it did take me time to see, the bigger picture. I thought I saw a bigger picture, but there's even a bigger picture, right? To see programs, right? To see funding streams, right? To see the connections between different pieces, right? And I think that, you know, I think that instead of it taking you years to put all these pieces together, right? I wanted to help expedite that, right? So there are people who are working in communities that are raising families that are surviving, right? And I get they can't sit on a subcommittee and they can't slowly build this out. That's what we're trying to do here. Like I want to compress the learning curve. I want to take what took me years to understand and make it accessible. So that way more people from our communities can show up to these processes informed and ready, right? Because there's a lot of work that has been very done and a lot of work that is it's really real to me. Like these are pathways that are really real. The people who really built them from real communities like ours who decided that showing up consistently was worth it. And I do believe that it was worth it. And I want you all to come be a part of whatever happens next. Right. So next episode, right, we can start looking through recommendations. We can once again go deeper on the website. I'll show you more about what's on the website, right? Looking at different goals, right? Tribal stewardship and land return. And I do think that, that's where the task force, started. And I do believe that's where, respectfully, we should start there as well and just take a look at it. And if you want to read ahead, that once again, the full report is on the SGC's website. Feel free to download it, start reading it. I'm working on creating like an audio version of it because I just think that might be helpful for people. Definitely, this is for people who want to tap in, who want to be a part of something bigger. So feel free to share this episode, leave a comment. Once again, go to sgc.gov. If you want to learn how to grow food yourself, if you want to learn how to fix your food system, if you don't know where to start, you can start with buying my book, From the Block to the Table. I think this is always a great way to start, where you can get educated, you can innovate new ideas, and you can learn to implement those ideas. This is where I definitely think you should get started. Always, I spent years writing this book. This is, I think, my greatest work. You can learn how to grow your own food, and you can learn how to get involved in the food system and use all the tools and resources that we have around us. Right? I have a physical, I have digital, and I have audio books. So yeah, once again, I'll see you next episode. This is Secure the Soil. Peace and blessings.